Doomsday Machine.
Hey, what's up? It's Ollie Far Too Loud, and I am here making another tutorial about Doomsday Machine, but this is for a different bass sound which someone got in touch with me and asked me about, and I looked up the preset that I'd saved and I thought this could be pretty interesting because I had made the sound with Yuhi's Zebra, which actually I haven't used in a while, and I don't see too many people using these days. I'm guessing that's because of Serum, and when Serum was released, now it's all Serum Mania, and I have definitely been using Serum a lot. But I opened up this sound and I thought, I haven't used Zebra in a while, so I think I'm going to go back and make some sounds this week, because it is a very cool synth. And I'm assuming that most people are familiar with Serum, or even Massive these days, but you know, looking back at this sound, there's definitely some sort of parallels that once you've worked with Serum, that you can take over to Zebra and immediately start making some cool sounds with it. So even though it looks quite complicated on the outset, it's not going to take you long to get into it, and perhaps with this sound it would be a good intro. So when you open, I'm not going to do a full video on Zebra because it would take hours and hours, but I'm just going to explain this sound, and you'll start to be able to work with it once I've done that. So when you look at Zebra window, you've got this grid in the center here, and in each block you can load a different sound generator or sound processor, so an oscillator or a distortion or a filter, or some more crazy ones like ring mod or whatever, and you could potentially fill this whole grid up with different building blocks and make stupidly complex sounds, but I find in Zebra that you only need to use a very few to get a really cool sound, because the actual building blocks themselves, the oscillators and filters, have a lot of really cool controls on them to tweak the sound, so you don't necessarily need to use too many of them. And in this sound, you can see it's pretty basic. There's an oscillator going into a filter and then into a wave shaper, and then separate to that another oscillator without even any processing on it, just going direct to the output. Okay, so the oscillators in Zebra, kind of like with Serum, are made up of a bunch of different waveforms, except in Zebra there's only 16 of them, not the 256 you get in Serum. However, you've got this wave knob which does scan through them, and Zebra morphs between those 16, so when you change the wave knob, the sound has a smooth transition, and modulating that wave knob, as with in Serum, is a really cool way to get interesting sounds. And so with this Oscillator 2 here, I've used the decay on envelope 2 to modulate it such that when you hit the note, that the sound changes a bit. So the sets of waves here, they don't call them wavetables, they call them oscillator module presets, but you can download a whole bunch from the internet. I've got loads of them in here, so I must have just for this sound, I think selected one that I liked and then used that. There's different morph modes down here as well that you can try out. Another sort of parallel in Serum, you've got the warp knob, which changes the shape of the wave using sort of various stretching algorithms. In Zebra, you've got these oscillator effects, and you can have 2 of them per oscillator, and there's a whole bunch of different ones. And the difference is that these are spectral, so it actually looks at the individual harmonics or partials of each waveform, and then it will do various mathematical algorithms to those, which can result in some really crazy effects. But these oscillator effects are essentially a great way to get more complex tones. So on Oscillator 2, if I just show you just that on its own, I've used one called Expander, and it's no modulation. I've just used it to generate more harmonics in tones. So there's the sound without the expander, and if I turn it up, you can hear how it changes that oscillator sound. On Oscillator 3, I've used 2 different oscillator effects, and I've used the envelope 2 decay again just to modulate them. The 2 oscillators in this sound, I've used one. It's got in Zebra here, you've got the sort of unison modes, but you've only got 4 options. You've got like a single voice, 2, 4 or 11. So I've used the 11 one here and detuned them a bit to get a wide sound, but then I've used Oscillator 3 just in single mode, just so that there's a mono sound in there as well, or something in the center. On Oscillator 2 I've used a filter, and there's 2 different types of filter. There's a standard one and there's this XMF one, which I've used here, which is basically 2 filters in one module, and you can select what those 2 filters are. So I've selected a low pass and a high pass, and you can also select how they're routed. So I've selected them to be routed in parallel. So you could sort of, these are kind of like the dual filter modes in Serum, where you've got just one common cutoff control and one resonance control, but then you can use this offset knob to change the distance between those 2 cutoffs of the 2 filters. So I've used that to just give a bit of tone, and again used envelope 2 decay just to modulate that so that the filter closes a bit when I hit the note. And then following that, there's a wave shaper. The wave shaper has a depth control, which is the amount, and the edge, which is the tone, and then there's different wave shaping modules. But essentially that's the sound, very simple. I've also used, there's a modulation matrix which I've used to set the mod wheel to do the vibrato, and there's also an effects section here where I've used this mod effects, which is sort of does phasing and chorus and flanger all in one, and so both oscillators are routed to that, and then I'm just mixing in some of it via this via the send and return knobs here. So that's essentially quite a simple zebra patch, but there are other plugins on top of that too. So the first thing I did to that was add an instance of Isotope Trash 2, which you all know that I love. This is just using the trash distortion module in multi-band mode, just because I wanted to make the sound more gritty. You know, I picked some of my favourite distortion modes: Sandpaper 1, Harmonic Control, Cracked Actress on the top one. I've explained this or shown you this in another video before, where I've used the wave shaper and then the filter afterwards to filter sort of any unwanted frequencies from the distortion out, because they'll generate higher and lower harmonics that you might want to filter out. So after the distortion, I've just taken out the high end on the low band, some of the low end on a little bit of high on the mid band, and taken all the low end out on the high band. So once I've added trash, it sounds a lot more gritty. Without, and then after trash, I've split the signal into 3 parallel chains. On the first chain, I've just added an EQ which takes off the high end. On the second chain, I've added an EQ which takes off all the low end. So I'm basically splitting the signal into 2 frequency bands here. That's how I would have done it in those days. Nowadays in Bitwig, I just use the FX2 device, which is a godsend, which is it does it in just one device here. You can just drop in plugins in the high or low band, you can change the levels, and then you can change the crossover frequency, and it's got a dry wet mix for the whole device as well, which is absolutely amazing. But in the olden days, where's that gone? I used to use EQs to do this, and so what I've done is I've added a phaser from D16 group just onto the high frequencies of this sound, and then there's a third parallel chain, and I'm using Isotope Trash on this. The trash module isn't actually doing anything, and turn that off. I've just used a filter or EQ here to take just the low frequencies of the sound, well, from about 2.5K down, so the low and mid frequencies, and then they're going into the Convolve module, where I've just gone through and picked one of the guitar amp modules and used the separate control to widen it out a bit. And then I find, you know, mixing in a little bit of that can add some real sort of thickness and nice depth to the sound. So that's something I'll do quite often. After that, there's just an EQ, very little bit of mid EQ, and then I've taken off anything below 150 Hertz because I've used, as usual, a separate synthesizer for the sub bass, and this is coming from Massive, my standard mixture of sine and triangle waves, so it gives you a nice subby sound but also some harmonics, plus harmonics from the tube distortion in the effects section as well, and then that's followed by an EQ just to take out any of the really high harmonics and just leave the lower ones. And so that is basically that sound. I hope you can go and perhaps discover Zebra a bit, perhaps with your knowledge of other Massive and Serum, other wavetable synths. Go and apply that to Zebra and see what you come up with. Until the next one, bye bye.
The Doomsday Machine.